Hello. It is Wednesday. And everybody knows what Wednesday is. It's approximately the 2, 3, 4 o'clock hour. I don't know. We mix it up every week. Rob Morales, RCO Network, here for the Inner Journey. And I didn't realize how much I would miss this person. And she is just a complete light to everything we have going on here on Wednesdays for the Inner Journey. Please welcome Ms. Mary Heather VanAlstyne.
Hi. It's good to be back.
Just kidding. Her name's not Heather, but you know that's kind of my pet name, I guess.
It's adopted now. It's for sure.
It's a thing that brings us together.
Yeah.
So every week we talk about emotions and the things it is to live this life and get through. You know, we find that the more you explore yourself, the more you understand emotions, the more you can control things, not only in the physical plane, but the spiritual plane as well. And how that makes you a better business person in many different ways. It has really helped me, and I know it's helped Mary, and especially through the things that she has gone through. We're here live, so if you have any comments or questions, go and drop those in the comments section. Give us a little heart, because we love that you love us, and we just want to love you back.
Yeah.
If you're on YouTube right now, hit the like button, subscribe, and watch us every week. So, hello, Miss Mary.
Hello.
We are back here. You know, it is a very good sense of comfort to have you back.
Thank you.
I don't want you to go on vacation again.
Okay. Never again.
Okay, you can go on vacation.
All right. In October, I will.
Except the days I go on vacation, then it's a whole different story, which I never do on vacation.
Yeah, no, I totally missed being here, and I'm really glad to be here right now. Yeah.
So you went on a little vacation, so you got a little break away from normal life and re-energize, recharge. How important is that, do you think?
It is the most important thing, because you know how they say in the airplanes you have to put your oxygen mask on before you can assist anyone else. And I honestly was finding myself in a little bit of a burnout mode. Yeah. And during vacation realized that some areas that I was stretching myself a little too thin and using up a little bit too of my emotional equity, my mental equity. So I was able to kind of make some shifts in my life and come back refreshed, rejuvenated, and ready to kick some butt.
You know, the nice part, and I find myself when you're in those kind of lull states, low energy, you kind of fall back on your scripts, your innate scripts, what you learned essentially, you know, growing up. And we spend so much time trying to mature and trying to understand these feelings. And some people really don't. Honestly, I think there's a lot of people out there that kind of stretch themselves and kind of give the maybe the superficial kind of like, hey, I'm maturing, I understand emotions, but then they always fall back to their scripts. Not their fault necessarily. You know, it's just what we're comfortable with, and we always kind of go back to what's comfortable. And it takes that kind of sense of maturity to grow out of those scripts, or at least understand that, hey, you know what, you've been given a lot of things in your life that weren't necessarily yours to begin with, but you're kind of stuck with them because that's all you learned.
Yeah. Exactly. And I also know that, like, when we're put under pressure or we're really burned out, we tend to default to our old programming. And so I was able to notice in my life where there were a few areas where I was defaulting back into old type programming, old type thinking, because we're exhausted, we're under pressure, and so we're not able to be on top of it as much as we would normally be in our growth and our movement forward and our emotional maturity.
Yeah, and again, I think there's a lot of people out there that want to be mature, or at least, you know, they feel like they're an adult, but, you know, go back to those things that really don't show that they have grown up, you know. You know, my dad is probably the biggest example of that. You know, he recently passed, but up until like a couple years ago, you know, he had gotten in a fight with my mom in the parking lot. And they came to visit me for my birthday. And they got in this, he did. He got in this heated argument because of a word, you know. Every time he was upset, he would like to sulk. And meaning that he would disconnect emotionally and kind of run off to his little shop and tinker around for hours to, I don't know, contemplate, to kind of dissociate from the emotion, and then come back and pretend everything's fine. And so I called it sulking, and he got so frustrated, so mad that we said that he would sulk, that we said, okay, you know, he threw a fit and just got so angry, you know, because he was just trying to control. And there was a lot of things that I, you know, in my journey and trying to understand myself, it's like, oh, this is an opportunity. You know, I didn't fall into that script because I could see my mom just kind of wilting away and kind of going back to that. Okay, I'm sorry. I will pretend not to, that we said that, and pretend everything's fine because he's just angry, you know. And really at the end of it, the bigger picture was like, if any name and anything that we said to him that would dissociate us from the group, he would just try to gain control back in that group. meaning his family. I'm like, I can't be a sulker. If I'm a sulker, I'm distancing myself from you. And I feel distance. I don't feel like I'm part of the group if you're going to call me names, and he fell back in that old programming. And, I saw that. I took it as an opportunity, and I started kind of giving him some, it's just rubbing on his back and saying, hey, Dad, we still love you. Is there a different word we can use when you're upset like that? Can we say distant? Is it distant okay? And he was like, well, whatever. And normally in those situations, he would sulk for at least a couple of weeks. And a couple of weeks later, time would pass, and he'd come back and pretend everything's fine and go back into the circle again. That is a script. That is definitely a script.
Yeah.
And so that's been my best example. And when you see that and change the narrative, change the scripting a little bit, you can change the outcome. And in that case, he was back to himself in just, I would say, like maybe 2 hours versus 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. I had a similar script in when I would get overwhelmed or I would feel attacked or anything. I would definitely go in, hide. And, to me, it was, I had this, I don't need them. I don't need anybody. I'm just going to take my toys and go home, go over here and distance myself from everyone. So it's a protection mechanism for sure.
Yeah. And observably, and in my observations, it's one of two reactions. You either get angry and try to regain control, or you avoid and just kind of distance. I don't know if there's too much, reactions in between, but those are the two observable ones that I see repetitively over time in different people. It's like, hey, I got to gain control. I got to be angry because I need to know that you're going to stick around when I'm angry, or distance myself. Are you going to chase after me? You can look for me, when I'm hiding, basically.
Mm-hmm. And it's fun. And it's really funny because if you look at these behaviors in adults, and you compare it, because I have kids, I'm able to observe them, right?
Yeah.
And so now that I've had a wide range of children, I've been able to observe, like, these are adults basically throwing temper tantrums as adults, kid temper tantrums, right? They just never learned how to emotionally mature past that behavior. And now they're adults, and we call it sulking, we call it, whatever it is. But if you really look at the foundation of the behavior, it's very, very much childlike behavior.
I know what's helped me, though, in times, I did this in child welfare. When I was doing investigations, I was faced with a number of very high circumstances, very emotionally driven circumstances. When you're taking children away physically from a parent, the emotions are all over the place, and you don't know how people are going to react. And in those situations, it's like, okay, are they going to grab a gun? Are they going to shoot me? Are they going to attack me? Because that was a reality of what I did before. And I know I can't feed into that emotion. I knew in every situation, if I fed into it, it may make things worse for myself, my staff, and anybody that was with me, even law enforcement too. So that sense of like collection and trying to distance myself was very, very learned in my capacity. I had to. I knew, because that was a survival mechanism. I couldn't just feed into it. And so those are those things that's one of the things that I think people need to realize, is they can't feed into those emotions. If they really want to gain control of these situations, not to feed into them. But it does take a lot of effort, and it does take a lot of observation and knowing that they can't. But the one takeaway that I've always expressed and told my staff, in those situations, is view that person as a child, as if they were still 12 years old. We can be very forgiving when we see somebody as a 12-year-old versus the 30-year-old body that's in front of us. Or my dad, who was nearly 70 at that time, still having these fits like he was 12 years old, which is amazing.
That's great. I mean, I love that you said that, because I do a lot of work around forgiveness, and I'm always in this spiritual work that I'm doing. Forgiveness is very big on that. And that's one of the practices that actually I talk to people about, is when you're going through something like that. And because forgiveness is all about you. It's not about the other person. It's not condoning what they did. It's not saying it's okay. It's so that you can let go of that hot rock that you're throwing, that you're intending to hurt someone else with. It's so that you have some inner peace. And a lot of the exercises are about just that, seeing the other person as a little child. There's different guided exercises that I have excuse me, gone through, where it's like you either take them to the bottom of the ocean and then you just are with them. That's to disassociate from the world, right? And then you basically see them as like a toddler. Yeah. Because you are able to forgive more when you see someone as a young child. And we all started that way, right? We were all innately good, right? And it's just all the world's stuff that happened to us. So I love that you said that about that. And that's actually what I did throughout my life in order to become so accepting of other people and to have such a deep level of forgiveness. And moment by moment, even in conversations, I'm very calm when I talk to people, because usually when they're throwing a fit, that's what I just, now it's automatic, right? I've reprogrammed my subconscious mind to automatically see this little child whenever I'm triggered by a behavior of someone. And that's helped a lot.
Yeah, and it's not so much that you see them, but also to give the reverence as if they were a child.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people don't grow.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's an automatic assumption just to assume somebody's 18, they're an adult. Mm-hmm. You know, I think there's some parents out there that say, you know what, they're 18, but they're not really an adult.
They're really 12.
I mean, I don't know what the cutoff age is from when somebody is really an adult per se. You know, is that 21? Is that 25? And then do we start treating them like adults? Like now at 42, it's like, well, I was my assistant. He's 25, and I'm like, yeah, this kid that I just hired. I'm like, he's 25. He's not a kid. But I addressed him that way because again, that sense of maturity isn't completely there.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
But there are ways and things to recognize the differences between those, and we identified a few of those before the show. We kind of went through a few. And I think we're about 12 minutes. So we got a good amount of time to kind of go through each to help each one of you to understand, you know, the differences between the two, you know, what is emotionally mature versus immature, you know? And so one of my go-tos and one of my favorites that I talk about all the time, people ask me, are you happy? Are you happy with the person you're with? Are you happy in your career? Are you happy with your life? And I truly, the way I've always said it is I am very content. I'm not happy with everything, and I don't think anybody really should be, but I'm not sad either. I'm just satisfied with the direction of those things that are going, and sometimes those are happy and sometimes those are not so happy, you know, and that's okay. You know, I don't know why people focus in on, are you happy? You know, because it's just one side of the coin. You think?
I think, yeah, and it's all in how you view the word content too. It could also be that you're in acceptance of the way that things are, right? To me, content feels a little blah. Like,
really?
I don't know. I don't know. But maybe that's just my own view on the word. I'm just content. I'm neither happy nor sad. I don't want any more.
I'd say content is more satisfied.
Okay, so satisfied to me is very different than content.
Oh, really?
So but that's my own. That's
your thing.
Yeah, my own thing. Like,
but that's my perspective on life, is that I'm very content. You know, in the direction things are going with the CEO network, with real estate part. You know, with relationships, with the home. You know, I mean, I wish circumstances were different. Like, I wish I could make an offer on a house that I like and actually get it accepted because we're still house shopping. You know, and that's been like a whole 9-month thing. But I also appreciate the process. Like, hey, you know what? Maybe there's a higher authority that's in charge there, and they're saying, hey, don't buy this asset, don't buy this house, because there's some things that are going to change. And so it is what it is for right now. And so I'm like, I'm okay. I'm content. We're not, you know, the mortgage payment's really low in the condo that I'm in. And I'm like, okay, that's not bad. I've been able to save money. So I think it's really the focus, right, and what you focus on.
So how you describe that is exactly what I say, except I use the word, I'm in acceptance of reality. In every area, right? You know, some things are great, some things I wish were better, and I'm in full acceptance. And I think we're basically saying the same thing, just using one different word.
Yeah, and I think words do have an impact.
Yeah,
based on how you're connected to that word. Mm-hmm. If you're sad, you're always going to kind of lean towards your feelings and your interpretation of what sad is. Mm-hmm. If you're happy, you're going to always lean towards that interpretation of what happy is. And in this case, content versus satisfied. Yeah. I'm very content.
Yeah. Well, that's great.
I'm not happy. I mean, there's some things I wish you would change.
I'm very satisfied that you're content.
I'm content that you're satisfied.
Great.
Oh boy.
Oh, funny.
But being content with our lives is not seeking approval from other people. And I think we do that in relationships a lot. You know, we seek approval from somebody else, or at least validation from somebody else that I'm going on the right way. And you hear that all the time. You know, hey, do you think I'm doing this right? Do you think I've made the right decision? It's like, well, I don't know. Have you? Do you feel like you've made the right decision? Do you feel like you're happy? I mean, it's not about somebody else validating that. And I think people lean towards that, or people seek that, and they will put that on other people to validate themselves that they're in the right direction. And then, and in turn, you're not emotionally mature if you're blaming the other person for the decisions you made.
Victim. Yeah. Victim mentality is what we call that, right?
Yeah.
I think the other thing about contentment and satisfaction in life is that, the only time that we're not is when we think things should be different than they are, versus just accepting where things are at and doing what we can from where we are. That's a huge part of being discontent or unsatisfied in your life, because when we're in acceptance of where things are and we know that we're working towards something different, and it's not about it should be this way. It's the shoulding yourself to death, right?
Yeah.
And don't should on yourself. And so that's what causes
I like that. Don't should on yourself.
That's what causes that discontent, that unsatisfied, that it's because you have an expectation. We always talk about expectations. It's recipe for disaster, right?
And I think the natural inclination is to apply that to somebody else. Hey, I'm in this relationship because when we first started, you made me happy. You were having sex with me all the time. We were eating whatever we wanted. We were doing all these things. We were going on adventures and hikes and stuff. And now we're at home all the time. Now we're having sex maybe every 6 months, and we don't even get to hang out. You're always busy. And so you're projecting all those feelings and emotions on somebody that you initially had that they took away or they gave you, and now you've kind of balanced out to where things should have been at the beginning. I think, and if we were more honest in relationships at the beginning, we'd probably we have better relationships later on in life.
Oh, instead of putting that shiny package on for a little while. What do you call that?
What do you mean by shiny package?
You know what I mean? The what is it? What do they call it when you first start? Anyway, you
the makeup.
Makeup. I mean, even men makeup. There's that.
I did makeup for photos once. And I got laughed at.
Not literal makeup.
We do put our best foot forward at times, and that's for a reason. We want to portray kind of our attributes, but we just can't blame somebody else for not giving us what they initially gave us.
Right, and I think we can avoid that by being whole in who we are and showing up authentically from day one. Yeah.
And that's hard, though. I mean, you want people to like you, so you kind of project.
It's hard, but I have.
So on your first date, did you kind of glam up a little bit, like fluff and?
On my first date, I actually showed up after running myself ragged for work all day and was like, because I had been telling myself for a while, I'm going into this, whatever my next relationship experience is, they are getting 100% authentic Mary. I'm not putting up any fake makeup. I'm not doing any of the best foot forward. It's just going to be me from the beginning. And it has been the most beautiful experience I've ever had in a human relationship, romantic relationship.
I've come to appreciate sweaty, stinky Mary too. Just kidding.
No, it was really, I'll have to tell you about that story sometime. But yeah, it was like.
You showed up in your sweats?
Not sweats. I was working, but I was having the worst day, and I didn't get a chance
was
to
your
go
first
freshen
date?
up. It was great.
Yeah.
It was great. And I found out that the pressure is off me when I'm not trying to be somebody else from the very beginning. And that allows you to just be authentic and allows the other person to be authentic. And then you don't find out 6 months later that you're not,
Yeah, and I think that's a trick too, allowing somebody to reveal who they are and feel comfortable, because that takes a whole other thing too. Like allowing not only yourself to provide this comfort area for discussion and being yourself, but also having the other person receive that too and feel comfortable enough to be themselves and to communicate freely. That's definitely a challenge because sometimes you don't want to hear things, and you don't want to deal with things, and sometimes you'll blame and kind of point the other person down. Especially if you're in the dominant role, you'll shove that other person down in a hole so that they don't, oust you for being yourself. I don't know. It's an interesting dynamic. My other thing too that luckily for me in the work I did before is it forced me to listen. When you do investigations, you can't go and reveal the reasons why you're doing an investigation. You actually have to listen. And we went to a lot of forensic training. So we did a lot of forensic interview training, and that class in itself was a whole week-long 40-hour class to learn how to listen.
Mm-hmm.
and not serve as an agenda. You know, when I trained my investigators, the one thing I had to train them, especially talking about sex abuse and talking to sex abuse victims, is not to give any expressions, because you validate whatever feeling they have. And there's times when a child reveals to you, like, hey, this man touched me. And you can't go over there and console. You can't be like, oh, I'm so sorry. It's never going to happen to you again. And, you know, that automatically registers in her mind that that's a bad feeling. And you can't do that during an investigation. You want them to have that discussion in front of a detective, in front of a camera, so it can be recorded so that they can actually go after the perpetrator in that situation. And it is a whole other skill in itself to separate from those emotions and just be like, okay. And then what happened? And then what happened?
Yeah.
And hear the worst and worst that people do with each other. But it does take a lot of emotional strength not to just, oh my God, I'm so sorry, you know. And you can't apologize. In those situations, you can't apologize either.
Yeah. That's such an extreme example of being able to, you know, detach from things and listen.
Yeah, I think that's why sometimes I find myself, I have resting bitch face too. I have RBF.
I don't think so.
Well, at times I do, especially when I'm listening. I kind of,
Okay.
because I just lose all affect in there, and I'm engaged in the conversation. But it's hard for people to read me. It's like, because people will say, and they will challenge and check to see if their feelings are okay in this space. You know, they'll be like, yeah, you know, I like being sexual. They'll wait for that response. I'm like, okay. Oh,
You're too well trained.
So, yeah, but that was a random example. You know, there are certain things that people don't feel comfortable with. Sex is a big one. People don't like talking about sex. It's still a faux pas or taboo to talk about. You know, it's in our culture. You know, there was an OnlyFans place here. There's an OnlyFans marketing company that was here in the office space, and the staff would be like, oh yeah, they do marketing. Yeah, I know they do the OnlyFans stuff. It's like, yeah, they do OnlyFans. Like, why is it a shame? I mean, that's just a business, you know. And if people are doing it, that's what they do. But there's still kind of that shame behind that. There's still a whole kind of cultural adherence to things.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Anyway,
we kind of got off on a side rail.
I know, but listening has been, you know, versus talking. I think we're so vested in like shoving our feelings on somebody else and telling them how we feel, and it gets to these points where we're just arguing and there's really no outcome. You get to vent, but you don't really get to a place to where there's either compromise or understanding. It's just like you're fighting. It's two bulls in a ring and waiting for somebody to keel over so the other one feels empowered. You know, I think, you know, in my experience, you feel more empowered when you actually are there, present, and can hear everything the other person is saying in an honest and respectful way. That is true strength, when you can hear that you screwed up and not react to it, and you're like, okay. Oh, well.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with someone recently, and I was like, there is a lot of power in being the silent one, the listener, right? And because I tend to be in meeting environments very quiet because I'm listening to everything that's being said, and I notice a lot of the, you know, in some instances there are bickerings that happen back and forth, and I'm just observing two people who are waiting to talk versus hearing what the other person is saying, and they're very stuck on either being right or proving someone wrong, or whatever it may be. They're not listening. And so I've been able to watch these situations, and then when I do finally speak, it seems like people are like, whoa, you know, because when you're not always the one reacting, right? Reaction is something that we were going to talk about, and jumping in to have your point be heard. Granted, there are times for that, right? But you just gain more respect, I feel, you know, and you're able to, like, and it's a practice. It's a practice to be able to sit there and listen, because a lot of the times if you start paying attention, mindfulness, which this all circles back to, you'll hear yourself at that moment when you're not listening anymore and you're thinking about what you're going to say instead. It's very clear when that happens once you start paying attention to it. And so the practice is to lessen that more and more and just kind of go, okay, don't think about what you're going to say, you know, and just continue to listen. It's just constantly reminding yourself mid-conversation a lot of the times. And then eventually it becomes more of a natural thing.
Yeah, and I think the takeaway too is if you find yourself arguing all the time, with your spouse, your partner, the person you're intimate with, what do you get out of it? What do you win?
It's always a need to be right.
To be right.
Or prove someone wrong.
But it doesn't get you anywhere.
Right.
If you're the one that wins, if you're the one that's right, it gets you to be the other person to be dishonest. It puts them in a situation where they can't be completely honest. I don't know. Maybe dishonest is the wrong word. Maybe not can be completely honest.
Defensive causes a lot of
defensiveness. Sure.
Yeah.
But it's still, at the end of the day, you might be right, but guess what? They're not going to be talking about those things with you anymore.
Right.
And I'd rather hear the things. I'd rather hear, like in my ex-wife situation, I'd rather hear, very painfully so, that she's been with somebody else and deciding to be with somebody else than to sneak around and hide the fact that she's with somebody else. Yeah. And it was a very hard pill to swallow, and it hurt tremendously. But I'd rather know that, and then just to assume. For I think about a year, I was assuming that she was with somebody else, and it was just a lot more torment, And then when she finally revealed that, I said, okay, I made a decision, and I separated, and I ended the relationship. She didn't want to, but I ended it.
I think that, you and I both talked about how people come to us a lot to talk about things, and when you're a listener and you withhold your need to be right or whatever, people feel safe. And that goes for intimate relationships too. When you're able to just be that listener, people feel safe to express themselves to you, and that can grow into just a beautiful communication, right? And then that boils down to, like, the first step is shortening your period between the stimulus and the response, the reaction that you have. It's about kind of like a little bit of self-control over, maybe you want to react and you just wait a little bit longer to react each time. But these are all just, everything we talk about is a practice, tiny little practices that we can do. Eventually you look back in a year and you're like, wow, my emotional maturity is much higher. My EQ, emotional quotient, right, is much higher than it was a year ago. But it's all about little tiny things that we do on a day-to-day basis. And for me, it was pause before reaction. Pause before reaction. And that has done so many great things for me as far as my ability to communicate and people feel safe.
Do you hear that, Violet? Do you hear that? I want you to take notes as we're going along.
Oops. The table is shaking.
Yeah, I know. We're about 3 minutes away, Miss.
Wow.
Was there any more on your list that you wanted to talk about?
Talk about?
I do have one more, but
okay, you go ahead.
You want me to go?
Yeah.
I think the difference between understanding emotional maturity and immaturity is really living in the present moment. Yeah. Because there's so many people that cling on to the past and what happened, and there is a certain aspect to understanding emotions where you have to be reflective of the past. Mm-hmm. You have to understand where your origins, where your scripts came from, because they were written, and they weren't written by you necessarily, but you do control them. It's like a book. It's a book that you're very familiar with, that you read over and over again, like the Bible, Yes, I said the Bible. Don't put your negative comments in there. But we lean on the Bible for, like, spiritual guidance. And very much in the same way, our minds are built that way. We lean on the things we've learned in just habit, the things that were taught to us as kids. So we lean on that book and those scripts. And as we live life, we lean on those to other people and expect them to live by the same rules and laws in the same book that we have. We physically, in our realm today, in our world today, we lean spiritually on the Bible. But again, there are things in our own head that we lean towards and impress upon others. And this is the way it should be, enforce that upon them. And a lot of us do live in the past still, like, hey, you hurt me this way. This is what hurt before. You're to blame for this, but they're not really living in that present moment. Living in the present moment is the recognition of the past, but it's also a failure if you don't use that understanding and use it in the future, or use it
as a tool
for yourself. As a tool
to learn something from, right? Versus go victim to. And I think that victim mentality is that's what kills us and makes us very emotionally immature, because it's pointing outward. It's looking at the past and going, woe is me, versus, okay, great, maybe that was a hard situation, but this is what I learned from it. Yeah. And then the attitude of gratitude around that, right? All these different things tie together so well that we were talking about. But you're absolutely right about living in the present moment. Like, I heard a saying that said the rearview mirror is small and the windshield is large for a reason, because your past is back there and your future is where you should be focused. And, you know, the only time I ever go to the past now, I used to tell my story a lot. You know, I had some rough things happen throughout my life, and I decided at one point, like, unless there's going to be a reason to tell it because of something that I learned from it, I'm no longer going there. I'm no longer telling the story because it doesn't define me. And I've gotten what I've learned from it. And I use it now to empower people. Like, look, if I can go through this, you can, you know, and this is what I learned through it. And this is what you could too. So, but making that decision to stop going into the past, to look for reasons why things are the way they are, because, you know, oh, because I had a rough this or I had a rough that. It's like, start looking at it for the lessons that you were able to get from it. Right.
Absolutely. And, you know, we'll finish up here. I started the show talking about my dad and understanding that we all follow patterns. Our scripts are patterns of behavior. And again, it's a failure on you to emotionally mature if you don't recognize those patterns. And then obviously once you recognize it, the next step is, what do I do next? You know, and like I said, at the beginning of the show, I talked about my dad and how he kind of threw a fit about sulking. And when he was in that rage and in that moment, just angry, I recognized, hey, I'm not going to walk away. And I know that he just looks for love and support, just like the rest of us. Mm-hmm. And he wants to be nurtured. And so that was the very, very first reaction. Instead of like, you know, clamoring down and pretending he's, you know, just angry and then going on with the day, I sat there. We sat in the car. I made him listen. I consoled him. I gave him a little back pat on the back. And my other hand held his arm and said, hey, Dad, is there a different word we can use? And by the way, I love you. We're here for you. Okay. Is there a different thing we can say? Because you obviously do these things a lot and we see that, but we want to help, but we still love you too.
Yeah.
And again, that transition, my mom, I'm staring at her in the back and I'm like, see, there's a different way.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm trying, in a way, I'm coaching her. This is my mom.
Yeah.
She's 30 years older than me. And I'm over here, you know, as her son, coaching her because she's just another human being. Mm-hmm. And she is just a lost child, just like the rest of us. We're all these lost little kids that are in grown-up bodies. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And I wish that we did share that reverence for that and understood that we don't take the time to emotionally mature, because nobody's going to teach you. And you have to do it yourself.
Yeah, and the biggest thing, I think, a big benefit about emotional maturity is just like you just explained, your level of compassion for other people goes through the roof, because you now start to, you become more empathic. You start to understand people a little bit more. Imagine if that spread around the world, right? I mean, we could have world peace. It's definitely possible. I think that it all starts with us taking responsibility for ourselves.
Yeah, and that's a hard pill to swallow, because again, so much of us are in that mode where we just project out. Yeah. And it's always somebody else. Yeah. So with that said, we're here every week on Wednesday exploring emotions and the things that make us us. You know, Miss Mary VanAlstyne, I solely and wholeheartedly appreciate your time and every week here. When she's gone, I do miss you. So if you want to tune in every week, every Wednesday, we're here roughly 2, 3, 4 o'clock hour, somewhere around there. If you want to tune in, if you're watching Facebook, just log in. And YouTube, again, hit that like, subscribe, and see us every week. So until then, we'll see you guys. Peace out.